Hey guys, tonight we step into velvet slippers and embroidered chaos as we shadow the most exhausted, unappreciated, yet utterly essential figure in the court, you, the Renaissance pleasure planner. This is not just a story, it's a memory that somehow belongs to you too. You'll feel it by the end. Outside your window, Florence, or is it Ferrara, is still wrapped in dawn mist, smelling faintly of horses and roasted barley. The sun hasn't even risen, but you've already begun mentally organizing today's lineup of delights, diversions, and disasters waiting to happen. From scandal-proof seating charts to finding a swan that won't bite nobles, your job isn't just entertainment, it's survival by spectacle. You haven't even stretched yet, and the list is already impossible. There's a feast to organize, a choir to coordinate, and the Duchess is whispering rumors about a surprise she expects you to orchestrate, which could mean a romantic midnight tryst or an aerial display of doves. You'll find out when she remembers to tell you. Maybe. This is Renaissance luxury at its sharpest. Gold-threaded, perfumed, anxiety-laced. You probably won't survive this day without a nosebleed or an ulcer, but let's see how far you get. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You rub your temples and glance at your parchment. Today's highlight, a simple evening gathering for the Duke of Urbino and a dozen of his most sycophantic friends. That's the phrasing from the official brief. You, of course, know what this means. A minor war over appetizers, a musical duel, and probably someone fainting from overlacing their corset. First, location scouting. The palace gardens are a good fallback, but yesterday's rain means puddles, something you learned to watch out for after that infamous ankle twist incident last month. The Duke's cousin still blames you for that. She says the mud ruined her marriage prospects. You wonder if it was really the mud. You dispatch a young page, barely 13, always barefoot, to check if the herb gardens have dried. Meanwhile, you sip a brew made of steeped lavender and fig leaf. You need to stay calm, composed, or at least look like it. A knock at your chamber door. You open it to find the apothecary's apprentice holding two vials, one labeled Morning Glory, the other Midnight Temptation. Perfumes. For tonight. Which does the Duke prefer? The boy asks. You smile. Depends who he's trying to impress. Both, then? You sigh. Both. You tuck the vials into your sleeve and make a mental note to test them later. One whiff too many of civet musk, and someone will start sneezing mid-dance. Again. The real work, though, begins in your head. You start crafting the pleasure arc of the evening. A delicate curve from appetizer to aria, to flirtatious glances and torchlight. A Renaissance soiree isn't just about food or music. It's choreography, sensory architecture. And you, poor sleepless you, are the architect of illusion. The Duke's preferences, naturally, are eccentric. He once requested a comedy skit in which Aristotle plays chess with a goose. You delivered. The goose was uncooperative. The crowd loved it. But today's tone is subtler. The Duke is considering a new marriage alliance, so appearances must be elegant but not boastful. Romantic but not lusty. Intellectual but still fun enough that no one stabs a rival with a table knife. You list ideas. 3-course feast with regional wines. A lute performance during dessert. Fire breathers during the final toast? Maybe. Historians still argue whether Renaissance fire performers used alcohol-based fuels or some resin concoction that didn't blind them permanently. You'll settle for one who doesn't trip on his own torch. You check your notes again. Your master plan includes 15 staff, 2 cooks, 5 musicians, a backup poet, and 1 highly temperamental mime. Why a mime? Because the Duchess finds them calming. She's the only person in Italy who feels that way. Suddenly, there's a loud squawk from outside. You lean out the window. The swan trainer is already here, practicing with his birds on the palace lawn. He bows dramatically when he spots you. You nod back. It's going to be one of those days. By the time you descend the stone stairs into the perfumery annex of the apothecary's workshop, the air is thick with lavender, vinegar, and what you think might be burnt clove. You've been here more times than you can count, and still, the sensory overload never fades. Shelves stretch from floor to ceiling, cluttered with ceramic bottles, glass vials, and odd little satchels that smell like wet moss and basil. Somewhere between the dried marigolds and the pickled leeches is the key to tonight's signature scent. A sleep-deprived apprentice spots you and yelps, nearly dropping a tray of rosemary distillate. You weren't expected till afternoon. You smile, half threatening, half polite. The Duke's nose doesn't keep time. He scrambles off to fetch the master perfumer. You stroll to the testing counter and find a dozen scent strips already laid out, each with a label scrawled in questionable Latin. You sniff Venus bloom and nearly sneeze. Rose and jasmine with a musk-heavy base. Too assertive. Eros's cloak is worse. Ambergris with a hit of garlic. Why garlic? No one knows. Perhaps the perfumer had a late dinner. When Master Cesare finally arrives, he's wearing thick gloves and a mildly stained apron. You want something romantic, yes? He asks. Something to make hearts flutter, but not set fire to the ballroom? You nod. Also, no coughing fits, and nothing that reminds anyone of soup. He gestures for you to follow. Come, we mix fresh. Always best. You're led to a side room where Cesare begins his alchemical ritual. Drops of bergamot and rose are swirled together with crushed iris root. He eyes you, calculating. You planning a seduction? It's for the Duke's event, you say. So, maybe. You lean in as he lifts a vial of something deep green. Violet base with orange peel, he explains, for subtle sweetness. You take a cautious whiff. It's lovely, but it's missing something. You glance around, then spot a jar labeled civet, aged. No, you say flatly. Not again. Cesare shrugs. It lifts the scent. It clears the room. Historians still argue whether civet, the musky excretion from a cat-like animal, was truly beloved in Renaissance perfumes or just endured because nobles equated strong smells with power. You're on team endured. Instead, you suggest a touch of myrtle oil. Cesare raises an eyebrow, but obliges. The final mixture, once balanced, is delicate and flirtatious, enough to hint, not shout. You bottle it yourself and mark it with the Duke's seal. As you prepare to leave, you're stopped by the Duchess's lady-in-waiting. She's panting, hair slightly singed. The rose petals, she says breathlessly. They've arrived crushed. You blink. All of them? All of them. You follow her through a narrow corridor to a side courtyard where a linen sack of petals lies sadly collapsed. The petals were meant for tonight's grand ballroom entrance, a dramatic shower of soft red drifting from the mezzanine. Instead, it now resembles something a goat chewed on and spat out in remorse. They were shipped from Naples, she explains, By donkey, in the rain. You pinch the bridge of your nose. There's no time to reorder. You think quickly. We'll steep them in water and use the tinted water to scent the linen drapery. But what about the petal toss? We'll use dried marjoram flakes. Under candlelight, they'll look like gold. She blinks. You're making that up. Completely, you say, but it'll work. She actually curtsies before rushing off. You, meanwhile, finally glance at the sundial in the garden. It's not even midday. You're 2 hours behind schedule, and you haven't even begun to deal with the goat. You know you're in trouble the moment you hear the bleating echo through the courtyard. It's not just any goat. It's Matteo, the emotional support animal of Maestro Belladonna, the most temperamental juggler in northern Italy. He's standing proudly in the middle of the rehearsal yard, juggling 3 brass cups, while Matteo weaves between his legs, inexplicably wearing a crown of daisies. You said you were bringing fire jugglers, you say flatly, arms crossed. Belladonna catches the cups and bows with flourish. I said I would be dazzling. I didn't say with fire. And the goat? He gasps. Matteo has his own fan base. He stays. This is the problem with entertainers in the Renaissance. They are equal parts genius and chaos. You need 6 of them for tonight. Jugglers, a mime, a magician who claims to have studied in Egypt, and 2 actors from a traveling troupe who insist on performing a scene from the Decameron, the racy part. You turn your attention to the others gathered in the courtyard. One of the actors is arguing about lighting. The torches cast shadows that make my nose look like a weapon, and the magician is loudly requesting a raven for his act. A live raven. You eye the mime, silent in the corner, painting a white mask onto his face with slow, elegant movements. At least he's not asking for anything. Yet. You clap your hands. Rehearsal starts now. If you want to get paid and fed, you will work together. No improvisation unless I approve it. And no goat accidents on the marble. The magician raises a hand. What if the goat breathes near the fireworks? You stare at him. Then we all die, probably. Let's not test that. Still, you spend the next half hour choreographing their routines. The juggler will perform during the wine course. The actors will deliver their saucy comedy just after the main feast. The magician, fine, with the raven, will close the evening if you can find a raven by sundown. One of the kitchen boys suggests painting a duck black. You veto that. Historians still argue whether live animals were truly part of Renaissance party acts, or whether these accounts are exaggerated by guests who had a few too many goblets of mulled wine. Based on today, you're inclined to believe the wilder versions. As the rehearsal limps forward, a commotion erupts near the gate. A delivery cart has just arrived bearing a stack of painted stage flats, scenic backdrops for the performers. Unfortunately, instead of mythological muses or forest glades, these flats depict a battle scene from the Siege of Constantinople, complete with beheadings and fire. You march over, waving your arms. Wrong scenery. Where are the romance panels? The cart driver shrugs. They told me to bring whatever wasn't being used in Venice. You mutter a few extremely PG insults under your breath and order the panels hidden behind the kitchen until further notice. A party atmosphere is hard to maintain when your guests are seated beside illustrations of burning monks. You manage to extract one bright spot from the chaos. The fire breather, an enormous bald man named Fiorello, actually shows up early. He breathes fire over a fig tart just to show off. You give him an extra coin, and one rule: no flames near lace or wigs. He grins. You learned that the hard way? You sigh. Don't ask. By the time you escape the chaos, your notebook is smeared with ink, and your sleeves smell faintly of goat. You glance toward the gardens, where Mateo has started eating rose bushes. You don't stop him. You've got bigger problems, like the arrival of the bishop's aide, marching toward you, eyes narrowed, and he's holding a tapestry. The bishop's aide, a gaunt man named Father Ulrico, is fuming like a scalded incense burner. He holds the rolled tapestry with both hands as if it's radioactive and walks toward you with the expression of someone about to condemn a heretic. I assume this is your doing? He says, unrolling the fabric with a dramatic flick. The tapestry is, admittedly, glorious, woven in rich threads of vermilion, gold, and indigo. It shows a scene from Ovid's Metamorphoses, specifically the moment when Leda is seduced by Zeus in the form of a swan. It's tasteful by your standards. Only one bare thigh, no full nudity, and the swan is wearing a laurel crown. But Father Ulrico looks as though you've smuggled sin into the palace. This was hung in the bishop's reserved corridor, he hisses. Do you wish to doom this event? You resist the urge to explain that statistically, the event is already doomed on at least 5 fronts. Instead, you keep your voice level. That tapestry was meant for the vestibule. A mistake in the placement, I assure you. People are already whispering, he says. The last thing we need is a scandalous image of a woman consorting with poultry. You open your mouth, close it again, and simply nod. He insists on replacing it with an image of Saint Cecilia playing the organ. You agree, mostly because Cecilia is safe, tuneful, and doesn't kiss animals. After he stomps off, you summon 2 footmen and whisper, move the tapestry to the wine hallway, but cover it with a sheer veil. It'll look mysterious. We'll call it allegory. This, you've learned, is how Renaissance pleasure planning works. Nothing is removed. It is veiled, recontextualized, or turned into metaphor. You glance at your schedule and wince. You're now late for the food consultation, but you have a moment to sit on a marble bench and press a cool, citrus-scented cloth to your forehead. You reflect, briefly, on how no one ever writes epics about people like you, the ones holding the brocade together behind the curtain. Then again, maybe that's for the best. You're just about to rise when a kitchen boy finds you. The chef says the peacock isn't cooperating. You blink. What do you mean, cooperating? He refuses to hold still for gilding. Right. Because, of course, tonight's centerpiece dish is a roasted peacock, reassembled and redressed in its own glittering feathers. It's a symbol of wealth, art, and completely impractical food presentation. You head toward the kitchen, stepping aside as a harried maid rushes past with a crate of sugar sculptures. Tiny fountains, domes, and towers all molded from spun sugar. One is already collapsing slightly from the humidity. Inside the kitchen, heat punches you in the face. The chef, Messer Donato, is red-cheeked, sleeveless, and brandishing a ladle like a weapon. You tell him to behave, he says, pointing to the oven, where the peacock carcass lies cooling, while a pair of cooks attempt to fix the neck in a dramatic curve. The tail, dyed with saffron and dusted in gold powder, lies limp on a nearby tray. You eye the bird. I'll speak to him, but he's been under a lot of pressure. Donato doesn't laugh. Together, you check the rest of the dishes. Marzipan fruits shaped like real pears and plums. A lemon tart molded into the face of Apollo. Historians still argue whether the nose is too Roman, and sugared violets for the table settings. It's art, all of it, designed to vanish. You're halfway through approving the wine pairings when the spice steward taps you on the shoulder. "We have a situation," he whispers. "The cinnamon, it's gone." "Gone?" He nods. "Confiscated at port. Something about counterfeit cloves." Of course it was. You try not to scream. Cinnamon is essential to at least 5 of tonight's dishes. And more importantly, it was a subtle signal of the Duke's growing trade influence. You curse the Venetian spice merchants under your breath. "What do we have?" you ask. He lists options. Nutmeg, too strong; anise, too polarizing; and dried lavender, too herbal. You stare at the table. Then it hits you. "We'll use crushed candied orange peel and brown sugar. The color will trick the eye. No one will notice after 2 goblets of wine." Donato mutters something in Sicilian that might be a blessing or a threat. You leave before finding out. Back in the hall, you catch sight of the juggler again. Matteo the goat is now wearing a miniature velvet cape. You sigh. Tonight may not be historically accurate, but it will definitely be memorable. The heat of the kitchen still clings to you as you cross the courtyard toward the makeshift theater tent, your sleeves fluttering behind you like the banners of a battle-worn general. The Commedia dell'arte troupe has requested this space to rehearse their highly refined performance, which you're beginning to suspect involves an indecent amount of double entendre and exaggerated groin gestures. The tent smells of old linen, sawdust, and nervous sweat. Inside, the actors are already mid-scene. One is pretending to be a love-struck noble with a squeaky voice. The other wears an absurdly padded codpiece and is chasing an imaginary pig. You pause in the shadows. It's hard not to admire their enthusiasm, or their total disregard for subtlety. "Cut!" you call out. That codpiece is historically inaccurate. The lead actor, a wiry man with a mustache you could twirl a ring on, gasps. It's a statement, not a documentary. You step into the ring of torchlight. It's a distraction, and the bishop's attending. Please, something modest, or at least smaller. He sighs and unhooks the offending accessory, tossing it onto a prop pile where it lands beside a fake lute and 3 wigs of dubious cleanliness. You settle onto a bench while they restart the scene. This time, the slapstick is toned down, the rhythm tighter. There's even a clever pun about tax collectors and cheese rinds that makes you snort despite yourself. You jot a note in your book. Place these guys between dessert and dancing. Nobody will pay attention before food, and they'll be drunk enough to laugh after. Still, there are issues. The backdrop has a rip. One of the actors can't remember his lines. The prop pig is missing a leg. You make mental adjustments, then get up to inspect the lighting. You've requested low-hung lanterns with colored glass to cast soft blue and red hues. It's not exactly Florence's greatest invention, but it adds flair. One of the lanterns flickers ominously. "Too much oil," you murmur, or "not enough wick." The apprentice beside you shrugs. Or a ghost. You blink at him. "Don't joke. We just fixed the tapestry scandal." As you leave the tent, your brain already sprinting ahead to the next disaster, a page runs up to you clutching a scroll. "It's from the Duchess," he pants. You break the wax seal. It's not a message exactly. It's a sketch, a maze, and a note in her looping, romantic hand. Something intimate. Something symbolic. You understand. You stare at the scroll, heart sinking. The Duchess wants a maze. Tonight. Built in the back garden. With symbolism. And no details. Historians still argue whether Renaissance nobility genuinely cared about the deeper meanings of their courtly entertainments or simply liked anything expensive and hard to replicate. You, tragically, know the truth. They want both. A metaphor that's also a marvel. You return to your quarters, grab a blank parchment, and start drafting. Each turn of the maze must reflect an emotional phase: curiosity, longing, confusion, surrender. You sketch archways shaped like question marks, alcoves with fountains of tears, dead ends decorated with fake letters of regret. It's part puzzle, part therapy session. You summon the groundskeeper. Get me 6 trellises, Ivy, any spare rose arches, and 2 blindfolds. You have 4 hours. He stares. For a maze? A journey of the heart, you say, very seriously. He doesn't ask questions, just runs. You wonder if you're losing your mind. Then again, maybe that's part of the job. By the time you return to the palace corridor, a group of children is chasing Matteo the goat again, who has now stolen someone's scarf and appears to be rehearsing his own performance. You look skyward. It's only mid-afternoon, and there's still the candle crisis to fix. You're halfway through retying your sash when a breathless servant nearly skids into you on the polished floor. "We have a situation," she wheezes. You sigh. "Is it the goat again?" "Number worse." "The candles." "Of course it's the candles. Always the candles." You race down to the storage cellars, the echo of your boots ringing like the soundtrack of doom. There, amid crates of linens and a crate mysteriously labeled "Live Eels, Do Not Shake," stands the candle steward, chewing his nails and visibly sweating. "We're out," he says, pointing dramatically at the empty shelf. "Beeswax, gone. All of it. I sent the boy 3 days ago to collect the new shipment. He returned with a lute and a girl named Clara." You blink. "You traded candles for a date?" "He says she's talented," the steward mumbles. "She plays madrigals." You take a deep breath through your nose, which now smells like mildew and disappointment. No beeswax means no primary lighting for the banquet. Tallow candles are available, but they stink like burnt bacon and make people queasy. Not ideal when you've got delicately sugared fig confections on silver trays. As if summoned by irony, Clara herself appears at the top of the stairs, strumming softly on a lute and humming a ballad about lost sailors and forbidden cherries. Her voice is lovely. Your eye twitches. "Clara," you say gently, "would you like to earn your place at court by being our musical distraction in the corridor outside the feast?" She smiles. "Do I get paid?" "In food," you say, "and perhaps future beeswax privileges." She nods. A win, you suppose. Back to the candle crisis. You remember the decorative Venetian lanterns still sitting in storage. Their colored panes cast a moody, romantic glow that makes everyone look 30% more attractive, especially after 2 goblets of wine. You dispatch 2 runners to fetch them. One of them is the same kid who brought Matteo a crown of fennel yesterday. You make him swear, on a stack of St. Augustine sermons, that no goats are involved in the lantern transfer. The other lighting dilemma is the carpet situation. The imported runner rug from Venice. The one with embroidered scenes of Apollo, Daphne, and that one time Bacchus tripped into a wine vat is still rolled up in customs. You march down to the logistics clerk, who's currently trying to organize crates labeled swan feed and emergency grapes. "Where's the rug?" you ask. He waves a quill in the air. "Still being examined. The import officer thinks it depicts political satire." "It's mythology," you growl. "She says Bacchus looks like the Pope." You rub your temples. "Fine. Get the cheaper rug from the bishop's guest quarters. That one has saints on it. Even better, you mutter. They'll bless the guest's feet. You're halfway back to the main hall when you're intercepted again, this time by a palace servant holding a feather duster and looking terrified. It's the Duchess, she whispers. She's just sent a message. The lilies in the fountain garden clash with her mood. You stare at her. Her mood? Yes, the servant says. She wants them replaced with blue irises, or possibly tulips. She wasn't sure, but definitely blue, unless she changes her mind. You clench your jaw so tightly you could cut glass with your molars. Historians still argue whether Renaissance nobles were genuinely emotionally affected by color symbolism, or simply liked bossing around exhausted underlings until someone fainted. At this point, you believe in both. You redirect the gardeners, who are currently building your heartbreak-themed maze, to uproot the lilies and dye what can't be replaced with crushed indigo petals. One of them asks if you're mad. You tell him, I'm a pleasure planner. We passed madness 3 courtyards ago. Back in the ballroom, you test one of the red glass lanterns. It casts a soft glow on the polished floor, reflecting faintly off the wall where the tapestry of Zeus and Leda now hangs, still covered with a translucent veil. It somehow looks even more suggestive. You sigh. Maybe you can just pretend it's a goose. You're barely out of candle and codpiece crisis mode when a familiar rustle of silk warns you that the Duchess is approaching. You straighten your posture, smooth your expression, and pray she doesn't say the words creative pivot. She does. We need a maze, she says sweetly, as if it's not the 6th impossible thing she's requested today. But not just any maze. It must express the emotional journey of a woman discovering herself within the limitations of power. You blink. Of course, you say. And how long should that journey take? She thinks. 6 to 8 minutes. 9, if you include longing. You nod solemnly, as if you're not actively contemplating hiding in a cupboard until midnight. Also, she continues, I want the final chamber to be a metaphor for liberation. Perhaps a sculpture, you suggest. She lights up. Yes, a sculpture of me, but as a tree. You pause. A tree? With wings, she adds. Very subtle wings. You've entered full dream logic. You sketch a plan with wide, winding paths, sudden false exits, and a central chamber with a mirror flanked by silk-draped vines. If the mirror is tilted just right, it might make her reflection look like she has wings. You don't say that out loud. You just nod wisely and make a note to bribe the sculptor with candied almonds. You send instructions to the garden crew. They've already assembled 6 wooden arches for the maze. One worker shouts, "We're out of ivy." You call back, "Use ribbons." But symbolic ribbons. Historians still argue whether Renaissance garden mazes were used for meditation, seduction, or just to trap annoying guests until dessert. In your case, the answer is all 3. As the Duchess glides away, satisfied for now, a new problem trots toward you on 2 highly polished boots. "Excuse me," says a harried-looking choir master with a scroll in one hand and a panicked frown on his face. "We've had a scheduling conflict with the church." Ah, of course. The bishop insists on a solemn choral performance before any dancing begins. Because nothing screams party like a 14-minute dirge in Latin about original sin. You sigh. Can they shorten the piece? The bishop says the full 7 verses are essential to the soul. You try bargaining. Can we add some upbeat lute accompaniment? That would be blasphemy. So now you have to schedule a gloomy choral interlude about repentance Immediately before the flirtation maze, roasted peacock reveal, and possible swan release. Perfect. You sketch a new timeline. 7 p.m. Guest arrival and subtle fawning. 7:30 p.m. Church choir sings souls into oblivion. 8 p.m. First wine wave and goat-free juggling. 8:20 p.m. Flirtation maze opens. Now 30% more metaphor. 8:45 p.m. Dessert, dancing, discreet romantic trysts. You tack on a possible emergency poetry reading if things start to unravel. You know, just in case someone needs to be distracted from a swan biting a diplomat again. As you finalize the schedule, one of the junior planners taps your arm. We have a peacock emergency. You turn, deadpan. Of course we do. Apparently, a noble guest has brought his own peacock. For comparison, he says his peacock is more majestic and has stronger tail plume curvature, the junior planner reports. He wants it featured. You stare into the distance, wondering how many Renaissance careers ended in bird-based duels. You give orders to discreetly house the guest's peacock in the secondary garden and tell the kitchen to keep the roasted one covered until the very last moment. Also, the junior planner adds, the mime would like to incorporate the theme of existential dread into his act. You nod slowly. Perfect. That fits right between the fire breathing and dessert. You head back toward the ballroom, your to-do list unraveling like a tapestry snagged on a goat's horn. You're sweating, slightly swaying, possibly sleep-deprived, but you're not broken. Not yet. Let's pause here and imagine for a moment, what would you have done in their place? You're doing mental math, trying to calculate how long it takes to construct a mirror-winged tree sculpture out of available materials, when a courier barrels into you with all the grace of a catapulted ham. Urgent! He pants, waving a parchment in your face. From the Venetian rug merchant. You brace yourself. Apparently, the merchant has arrived early, with friends, and he's requesting an audience to discuss placement options for his donation. An enormous carpet woven with allegorical scenes of virtue triumphing over vice. You unfurl the sample swatch. It features a woman stabbing a pig that wears a crown. You blink. Which one's virtue? He shrugs. Merchant didn't say. You send a note to the steward. Place it under the wine table. If someone spills, it'll be an improvement. Just as you're slipping the message to a passing servant, a gardener races in. We've run out of blue ribbon for the flirtation maze. You frown. What's left? Some red, green, and one roll of gold braid. You think? Gold for temptation, green for growth, red for danger. Make each path symbolic. If anyone complains, say it's based on Petrarch. Do you know if Petrarch ever designed a maze? No, you say, but he should have. Historians still argue whether symbolic color coding was a genuine design feature in Renaissance gardens, or just the result of someone running out of supplies and improvising wildly. As far as you're concerned, the latter theory deserves a statue. You're adjusting the new layout of the flirtation maze when the Duchess herself reappears, trailed by 2 lapdogs and a very small falcon in a jeweled hood. She inspects your sketch like she's appraising a painting. This part, she says, pointing at a shaded alcove with a reflecting pool, is where the lovers might find each other, or get lost forever, depending on their heart's truth. You nod. Naturally. I've also added a bench. She claps her hands. Perfect. Now, onto the swans. You nearly groan aloud. You had hoped to quietly retire the idea of a swan release. But here she is, and she has thoughts. I want 2 swans, she says. One pure white, One ink black. They'll circle the pond at twilight, symbolic of duality, and also romance. You squint. Do you know how swans behave around each other? She waves it off. They'll sense the mood. You bite back a reminder that swans sense blood and territory, not romantic ambiance. Still, you make a note to warn the swan wrangler. You're beginning to suspect he's using the same swans every time and just tossing soot on one of them to make it black. Before you can flee, the Duchess adds, "Oh, and please ensure that the choir doesn't sing too loudly during the swan moment. I want delicate longing, not spiritual thunder." You smile thinly. "Of course, I'll tell them to moan softly." She seems satisfied. By now, your notebook looks like it's been through a siege. Ink smears, crushed lavender, a bit of goat hoof print. You flip to the next page, where you'd hoped to plan the dessert sequence, but it's blank. That's when your assistant runs up, wild-eyed. "The poet's here." You squint. "Which poet?" "You know," she says, panting. "The famous one." You groan. "The one who writes verse while intoxicated?" "Already 2 goblets in?" She nods. "He's reciting something about olives and betrayal." You find him in the courtyard, clutching a goblet of spiced wine and shouting at a lemon tree. You fickle citrus," he roars. "You gave your scent to her and left me with pith." You rub your temples. "Master Angelo, perhaps you'd like a snack?" He blinks. "Only if it rhymes." "Cheese," you say. "Please." That works. You guide him toward the kitchens with a soft push and hope the chef doesn't hurl a ladle at his head. Once he's calm and slightly more vertical, you scribble him into the evening's schedule. Spontaneous sonnet slot, post-dessert, pre-chaos. You glance toward the horizon. The sky is bruising with dusk. You check your list. Candles? Not perfect, but placed. Choir? Melancholy at maximum. Goat? Contained. Sort of. Maze? Wobbly but metaphorical. Swans? Terrifyingly symbolic. You've done it. Almost. All that's left is everything. You've barely had a moment to breathe when the swan wrangler appears, looking as though he's aged 10 years in the past hour. "They've bonded," he announces grimly. "The white and the black swan. They're a unit now." You blink. "Is that a problem?" He hesitates. "Only if you expected them to circle the pond romantically. They're now fighting any other swan that enters the water, including decoys." "Of course they are." You inhale deeply and then ask, "Can they be coaxed? Bribed? With what? Bread and forgiveness?" You close your eyes for a moment. "Fine. We'll adapt. Place them in the reflecting pool early. Give them space, and make sure no children are nearby." You add under your breath, "Or clergy." He nods and retreats, mumbling something about feathers and lawsuits. You jot down another mental note. Replace "swan release" in program with "swan encounter." Unpredictable, possibly operatic. You think the guests will love it, or at least pretend to, which is functionally the same. Now, it's time for your favorite part of event planning, the dreaded guest list. You've returned to your chamber, rolled out the parchment scroll that stretches longer than a merchant ship's invoice, and you're seated cross-legged on the floor, like a monk about to transcribe a holy text. Here's the game. No 2 guests from rival families can sit at the same table. No unwed young ladies next to the poet, still recovering, now singing to his wine goblet. No minor nobles seated higher than foreign ambassadors. And under no circumstances can the Duchess's sister be placed near the Count of Forli, because they once had a thing that ended with a pie being thrown at a fresco. You draw, erase, draw, again. It's less of a seating chart and more of a battle map. Somewhere in this mess, you also have to factor in left-handed eaters. They must sit at the ends to avoid elbow warfare. The one cardinal who eats only boiled onions, and the Venetian merchant who insists on facing east during meals for trade luck. Historians still argue whether seating at Renaissance banquets followed strict symbolic hierarchies or devolved into social chess matches that tested even the most iron-willed of planners. You suspect the answer lies somewhere between astronomy and petty vengeance. You finally finish the seating plan. Sort of. There's one extra chair you didn't account for. You'll just tell everyone it's for Fortune herself. It'll sound poetic and distract from the error. You roll up the scroll, tie it with blue silk, and dispatch a servant to deliver copies to the kitchen staff, wine steward, and head butler. You pause, considering whether to alert the mime. Then you decide against it. Let him be surprised. Before you can rest, another crisis toddles toward you in the form of a costumed noblewoman in panic mode. The wardrobe mistress says I can't dress as Apollo, she whines. But I told her 3 weeks ago. You blink. You and 2 others. Well then, make them change. You smile. One of them is the Duke's cousin. The other is his actual astrologer. She crosses her arms. Then make me Mercury. Already claimed. Venus? Outfit still smells like civet. Fine, I'll be Artemis, but with a harp. You nod. Bold choice? Musical hunting goddess. Trend-setting. She flounces away, mollified. You scribble a side note to tell the musicians to prepare a harp solo that sounds vaguely divine, or at least distractingly plucky. And speaking of music, here comes the lutenist. He's young, sullen, and tuned permanently to the key of melancholy. He glares at the world like it once insulted his mother and stole his favorite mug. He's here to rehearse a sonnet that you ghost wrote for a knight who's trying to woo a lady above his station. The knight has a kind heart, a good jawline, and the poetic instincts of a brick. Hence, your involvement. You hand the lutenist the sheet of lyrics, penned carefully to be romantic but not desperate, clever but not smug. He skims it. Too many syllables. Sing it slower. He plays a few notes. The rhyme's weird. It's Petrarchan. He grunts. He's dead. Exactly. He won't complain. Eventually, he shrugs and begins to strum. And it works. It's not perfect, but it's honest. You feel a flicker of hope that some part of tonight might go as planned. Just then, a soft crash interrupts your moment of calm. A servant peeks in. One of the sugar towers collapsed, right onto the marzipan pig. You sigh. Which pig? The one shaped like the bishop. You close your notebook. Of course it was. You march to the kitchen, where chaos reigns once again. The pig, sculpted with unsettling accuracy, is now a pile of almond paste and sadness. The sugar tower that fell on it was a miniature rendition of the Palazzo Vecchio. I suppose, you say after a pause, this is a metaphor. Donato, the chef, shrugs. For what? For diplomacy, or dessert-based hubris. You decide not to rebuild the bishop pig. It was always risky. Instead, you salvage the tower and place it next to the fruit platter. When the guests ask what it is, you'll say it represents civic virtue. As you exit, the poet lurches past you, cradling a basket of grapes and whispering, "I'm ready now. The muse has returned." You pat his shoulder. Tell her to bring a backup stanza. You step back into the courtyard, now bathed in amber twilight. Servants are lighting lanterns. Musicians tune their instruments. Swans glide in slow circles, like ominous chandeliers on water. Your maze shimmers faintly under gauze and ivy. It looks almost like you planned it that way. You exhale. 1 hour until guests arrive. And by some miracle, this fever dream of art, ego, animals, and architecture just might hold together. Probably. Maybe. Okay. At least for the first 10 minutes. The first trumpet sounds as the sky shifts from molten peach to dusky lavender. You feel it ripple through your chest. Not just the note itself, but the thud of realization. They're arriving. You position yourself at the palace entryway, just out of sight. The steward takes the official welcoming role while you scan the scene like a paranoid hawk in brocade. Guests pour in, plumes bobbing, gowns sweeping, each entrance more theatrical than the last. The Duchess's sister arrives wearing a gown so wide it knocks over 2 candlesticks and a footman. She doesn't apologize. A minor lord arrives with a hawk on his wrist, and another brings a lute he cannot play, but insists on strumming moodfully. And then, of course, the astrologer appears, already muttering about Saturn being in retrograde and how that bodes ill for digestion. You step aside as they pass, watching each one fall into the ballroom's golden glow, where the candles, thankfully not tallow, cast a honeyed light across tapestries, long tables, and silver trays of marzipan pears. You allow yourself a moment of satisfaction until the goat appears. Matteo, dressed now in a new velvet cloak, blue, with little gold stars, is trotting confidently behind Belladonna the juggler, who is throwing flaming clubs into the air, as if this is a normal Tuesday. The goat stops near the wine table, and, with the solemnity of a monk, begins chewing on the tablecloth. You rush forward, intercepting just before disaster. Matteo bleats, unimpressed. You assign a servant to goat supervision duty and threaten him with poetry duty if he fails. As the guests settle in, the opening act begins. The choir files in, robes immaculate, expressions pious. They begin their performance, 7 long, Latin verses of metaphysical guilt and spiritual longing. It is exactly as uplifting as a monsoon. Guests shift uncomfortably. The Venetian merchant yawns. The Duchess, however, looks moved. She dabs her eyes with a lace handkerchief and whispers, "So tragic. So necessary." You glance at the swans. One of them has fallen asleep. The other glares at a lantern like it owes him money. The moment the choir ends, applause flutters politely through the hall, mostly out of relief. You step in quickly, signaling the transition. Musicians begin a light prelude. Trays of candied almonds circulate, and a scent of rosewater and spiced citrus wafts from the fountains. You've made it past the first hurdle. Now, for the real show, the maze. You escort the Duchess and a select party of guests, those with titles, jewels, or gossip-worthy relationships, into the garden. The path is lit with tiny lanterns hung like fireflies, and soft music hums in the distance. The Duchess gasps as the maze comes into view. "It's perfect," she breathes, "like walking into a poem." You nod, hiding your relief. The archways shimmer with trailing ribbons. The symbolic color paths you invented hours ago now look intentional. As the guests filter into the pathways, some arm in arm, others alone, laughter and gasps echo through the hedge corridors. Someone exclaims over a veiled mirror. Another stumbles into the dead end of despair and emerges looking genuinely contemplative. Even the sculpted "me but as a tree" centerpiece, cobbled together from draped branches and mirror shards, gets murmurs of admiration. You hear one guest whisper, "It speaks to the soul's root system." You consider fainting from relief. Back inside, You check on the dinner proceedings. The roasted peacock has been unveiled at the exact right moment, its tail standing in glittering glory thanks to last-minute scaffolding made from pastry rods. It doesn't just look edible, it looks divine. Guests gasp, toast the Duke, and clap politely when the fire breather flambés a bowl of candied figs. The juggler performs without setting anything on fire except what he's supposed to. Even Matteo, posted beside the dessert table like a shaggy little guardian angel, is behaving. The comedy duo takes the stage next. Their bawdy Decameron-inspired skit is just risque enough to get laughs, but not so scandalous as to cause papal objections. One noblewoman snorts wine through her nose. A success. Then comes the poetry. Your drunken poet stumbles into the center of the room, clutches a goblet like a sacred relic, and recites a sonnet so heartfelt it actually quiets the crowd. When olives fall from silent trees and moons forget to mend the seas, it's surprisingly moving. You blink. Is that a tear in your eye? No, it's just powdered sugar from the marzipan. Historians still argue whether court poets were truly inspired or just intoxicated. Tonight, it's clearly both. The performance ends with applause, a few tipsy cheers, and one guest yelling, "Say it again, but in Latin." The poet bows and immediately falls into a cushion pile. You let him sleep. The final performance is up next. The lute serenade in the flirtation maze. The knight, shaky but determined, stands under an arbor of vines and plucks the notes you taught him. His beloved, in a gown of violet silk, listens with wide eyes and a hand to her heart. You hide behind a shrub and whisper, "Say the line." "Just like we practiced." He gulps. "Wouldst thou hold my hand, even if thy fingers were sticky with figs?" A pause. She bursts out laughing, and then says yes. You pump your fists silently behind the hedge. As the stars begin to freckle the sky, guests wander back inside, drunk on wine, beauty, and just enough staged emotion to carry them through the night. Swans paddle slowly. Candles flicker low. The Duchess leans against a balustrade and sighs. Tonight was unforgettable. You smile, finally letting your shoulders drop an inch. There's still cleanup, still post-event drama to field. But for now, in this moment, you've conjured something rare and fleeting, a night that almost looked effortless. And that, in the Renaissance, is the most divine illusion of all. It's deep into the evening now, that liminal hour when candles start to drip dangerously low and nobles begin to unlace their collars, physically and emotionally. The wine has worked its charm, and the room hums with the kind of golden exhaustion that only arrives after hours of overconsumption and polite euphoria. But you, dear planner, are not relaxing. You're tiptoeing around with a quill behind your ear, still tweaking, still orchestrating, still making sure no one ignites a powdered wig by leaning too close to a lantern. A footman intercepts you near the dessert station, eyes wide. One of the guests has brought an uninvited guest. You blink. Define uninvited. A falcon. You don't even flinch. Where is it? In the music alcove. It's perched on a lute. You find it quickly. A haughty bird glaring into the middle distance while the lutenist stares at it like it just insulted his mother. The falcon's owner, a minor noble with questionable taste and a fondness for dramatic accessories, explains, "She enjoys music." "She's sitting on the instrument," you point out. He nods gravely. "Yes, she prefers to feel it." You count to 3 and whisper, "Very well, but if she poops on the tapestry, you're buying it." He bows. The falcon blinks. Back in the ballroom, the final wave of guests is settling into the late-night phase of the evening. Gossip, wine refills, and unsupervised decisions. You watch as two rival nobles, who were deliberately seated on opposite sides of the room, somehow end up at the same dessert tray, both reaching for the last sugared walnut. They freeze. Tension crackles. You sweep in, smiling like a saint descending from heaven, and pick up the walnut. Ah, the last. So symbolic. May I offer it to the Duchess as a tribute to shared abundance? They blink, nod, and back off, pretending they weren't about to duel with cutlery. You pocket the walnut. You'll need the sugar later. And then, the incident happens. Someone shrieks. Glass breaks. You whirl around, heart already sinking. In the center of the dance floor, a scene is unfolding. Belladonna, the juggler, has dropped one of his torches. The goat, O Matteo, has taken this as a cue to panic and is now galloping full tilt through the crowd, velvet cape flapping like a comet. The fire's out. No one's hurt. But one guest did faint dramatically into a bowl of poached pears. You kneel beside them, check their pulse, strong, and whisper, "The party has climaxed. You are part of its legend now." They moan faintly and give a thumbs up. You rise, already issuing orders to mop the floor, replace the pears, and escort Matteo to his quarters with a firm but gentle hoof massage. The juggler attempts an apologetic flourish, but you stop him with a raised brow and a warning. No flames until Lent. Despite the brief chaos, the energy in the room hasn't dipped. In fact, it seems to have added a layer of legend to the evening. People whisper and laugh. You catch someone saying, "Remember the goat charge at the Duke's soiree?" Iconic. You decide to lean into it. Within 10 minutes, the musicians switch to a lively folk tune, and spontaneous dancing breaks out. The Duchess herself twirls into the center, lifting her skirt slightly, cheeks flushed with wine and triumph. Even the astrologer is smiling, though he mutters something about Mars rising and possible ankle injuries. You signal the kitchen for the final flourish. A cascade of sugared figs and rosewater truffles, carried in by candlelight and presented on trays shaped like tiny boats. Why boats? You don't remember, but it felt symbolic at the time, and now it's too late to change it. A child, whose parent has clearly given up, bites into a truffle and declares it better than kissing. Several guests applaud. And finally, the poet stirs from his nap, stands unprompted, and shouts a new stanza into the room. O glorious night of pastry and fire, of goats and longing and sweet desire, let none forget the maize, the swans, the cheese, and may the Duchess never banish me, please. It's a hit. You hear someone say they want it carved into a fountain. You stand near the ballroom doors, eyes scanning the scene like a conductor watching an orchestra come alive. There's still cleanup. There will be morning after drama. Someone will wake up in the garden with half a tapestry as a blanket. But for now, this is it. This is the moment. And then, as if the universe knows you deserve one more gift, a young nobleman approaches you, glass of wine in hand. Are you the planner? You nod warily. I just wanted to say, he smiles, this was the most absurd, beautiful night I've ever had. You're an artist. You blink. I planned a goat stampede and a flaming fruit bowl. Exactly. He toasts you and walks off. You laugh. A real, tired, incredulous laugh. Because somehow, despite the wrong tapestries, the rival peacocks, the dueling codpieces, and the falcon on the lute, this night has survived. No, thrived. And And so have you. It's close to midnight now, that soft hour when even the most polished nobles start to slouch, and the candles sputter like they've shared your day. You stand in a quiet corner of the ballroom, arms crossed loosely, watching as the night dips into its final, most precious phase, unrehearsed pleasure. This is when the music softens, the laughter deepens, and the court's performance begins to crack, just a little. For a few fleeting moments, people stop trying to impress one another and simply enjoy the illusion you've built. And that's when the bishop arrives, late, predictably. He enters the ballroom like a disapproving wind, robes fluttering, face pinched. He looks around, clearly searching for moral offense. There is a brief pause in the music, a ripple of tension. All eyes go to him. You intercept immediately. "Your Grace," you say, with a smile practiced to papal levels of diplomacy. "We were just admiring the symbolic restraint of tonight's entertainment." He narrows his eyes. "I heard there were swans, unsupervised." "Indeed," you nod. "They represented the tension between the sacred and the profane." He blinks. "And the goat?" "Divine chaos." He gives a slow nod. "Ah." You exhale internally. You guide him gently toward the dessert table, thankfully restocked and completely devoid of pig-shaped marzipan bishops. He nibbles on a candied fig and mutters, "Acceptable." The musician strikes up a soft, hymn-inspired improvisation. You shoot the lutenist a grateful glance. He grimaces, but complies. The bishop settles into a corner with a goblet of watered wine, clearly planning to stay long enough to declare himself present at all times. Crisis averted. You pass through the hall, adjusting details on autopilot. One of the veils over the tapestry has fallen, exposing just enough swan beak to raise questions. You drape it back into place with the grace of a magician hiding his final trick. You check on the maze. Guests are emerging now, slow-footed and dreamy-eyed. Someone's lost a slipper. Someone else is clutching a posy of symbolic herbs you definitely did not authorize. The Duchess appears, arm in arm with her sister, both glowing with the satisfaction of having been seen, adored, and interpreted. "The mirror chamber," the Duchess says to you, "was revelatory. I looked into it and saw not myself, but possibility. That's precisely what we were going for." You lie fluently. She hugs you, briefly, but still. A hug. You're so startled, you almost forget to step aside as Mateo the goat, somehow freed again, parades past, wearing a wine-stained ribbon on his horns. You simply nod to the servant trailing him and mouth, "Contain him." Back in the ballroom, the tables have become conversational islands. People are perched on cushions, sharing candied almonds, sipping herbal infusions, and confessing minor emotional crimes. Someone is crying over a poem. Someone else is drawing a maze on a napkin and declaring it a map of my mistakes. The party is dissolving into gentle absurdity. You cross paths with Belladonna the juggler, now makeup smeared and smoking something that smells faintly of cloves and recklessness. He raises a flask. "To you," he says. "You made it rain joy." You raise a brow. "You made it rain flaming objects." He grins. "Same thing." You find yourself near the minstrel's corner. Clara, the girl who traded candle delivery for musical employment, is playing a soft melody on her lute, surrounded by a small, sleepy crowd. Her fingers move slowly now. She's improvising a lullaby. You lean against a pillar. Let yourself exhale. Just a bit. The Duchess approaches again, sipping a mild cordial now. "You've outdone yourself," she says. "I shall call this night the Labyrinth of Delight." You smile. Shall I commission a painting? No need, she says. The memory is enough. You watch as she walks away, trailing candlelight like a comet's tail. For once, no new request, no pivot, no goat-themed after-party. You consider crying. Instead, you find the poet, still semi-lucid, and give him a blank scroll. Write about this night, you tell him. Make it sound like it was planned. He grins. I already did. It's about longing, lace, and fermented wisdom. You nod. Add a goat stanza, but tasteful. He salutes you with his quill. Midnight comes. Bells toll from the far-off cathedral towers. People begin to drift toward the exit, full and dazed and content. Some thank you with murmured words. Some clasp your hand like fellow survivors of something glorious and ridiculous. You nod, bow, smile, dip. You are everything at once. Servant, sorcerer, shadow. And when the ballroom finally empties, when the music ends and the doors close, you are alone. You sit, just for a moment, in the center of the silent room. The air smells of lavender, wine, and candle smoke. Outside, swans sleep in peace. The goat, you are told, is finally in his stable. The moon is high and soft. And you? You are absolutely, utterly exhausted. But your event, your chaotic, gilded, stitched-together miracle was a success. You did it. And tomorrow? Tomorrow, someone's going to ask if you can do it all again next week. If your mind started drifting just now, that's all right. The past has a way of lulling us gently. You wake up in your chamber with a parchment stuck to your cheek and a piece of candied ginger in your hair. It takes a moment for your senses to catch up. The faint ache behind your eyes, the soreness in your shoulders, the lingering scent of beeswax and regret. Outside, the sun is already high, casting dappled light across the tapestries. Someone is playing a flute in the courtyard, badly, and you hear the distant crash of something expensive falling over. Morning has arrived, and with it, the aftermath. You pull yourself upright, only slightly surprised to find your planning notebook crumpled beneath you. Half the ink has smudged into a Rorschach of last night's chaos. One shape looks suspiciously like a goat with wings. You're not sure whether to interpret that as an omen or a confession. You dress quickly and step into the hallway, where a servant greets you with 2 words. It started. You nod grimly. Of course it has. In the banquet hall, staff are already clearing tables, scraping wax off the floor, and arguing about who knocked over the ornamental swan made of sugar. Someone has drawn a mustache on the tapestry of St. Cecilia. The culprit left behind a fig, as if to say, this was worth it. You begin triage. First, damage control. The garden maze is mostly intact, though one arch has collapsed under the weight of symbolic ribbons. The reflecting pool contains a shoe, a goblet, and, somehow, an eel. You remember the crate labeled, "Do not shake," and sigh. The Duchess's sculpture is missing 3 feathers from its mirror wings. The sculptor claims a guest tried to become one with it. You're not surprised. A kitchen boy appears with a report. Someone stole 4 pears, 2 candlesticks, and the entire tray of leftover marzipan mushrooms. You write, "Invent mythical dessert thief" in your notes and move on. Next, feedback. The Duchess sends a scroll, sealed in violet wax. You brace yourself, expecting 17 notes and an allegorical rant. Instead, it reads, "I have been moved, enlightened, disoriented. You are hired forever." You blink. Forever? You picture yourself doing this at 70, arguing with a goose while assembling a flirtation maze out of dried rosemary. You set the scroll aside, unsure whether to be flattered or terrified. More notes trickle in. A minor noble has written a poem in praise of the goat, who now has a fan club. Another guest raved about the maze so intensely that he proposed to his dinner companion before remembering he was already married. The bishop sends a passive-aggressive thank you note. Next time, fewer mirrors and less swooning. You decide that's a win. You check on the swans, both still alive. The white one has resumed its haughty disdain for everything. The black one now responds to the name Tragedy. The wrangler swears they bowed during the lute solo. You walk the halls, inspecting what remains. Stray feathers, a sticky doorknob, a shoe filled with rose petals. You find a guest's cravat tied lovingly around a statue's neck and choose to interpret it as spontaneous decor rather than a courtship attempt. You stop in the musician's alcove. Clara, your lute-playing candle thief turned minstrel, is still here, plucking out a soft morning melody. She looks up and says, "They asked me to stay. They want more music like last night." You nod. "Then you'd better learn more than one song." She grins, already working on a ballad about the flaming goat. Of course she is. Historians still argue whether the success of Renaissance festivities hinged on grandeur or spontaneity. Based on last night, you'd argue it's both, plus a sturdy table and one poetic accident. As you pass through the ballroom once more, you find the poet slumped in the corner, still snoring gently under a tapestry. You pull it up over his shoulders and let him sleep. He's earned it. So have you. Eventually, you return to your chamber, where someone has left a tray of ginger tea, sugared plums, and a single, perfect marzipan pear. Next to it, a note from the Duke. "Well done." The Duchess wept, the Bishop didn't storm out, and the Venetian wants to sponsor a rug-themed masquerade. Expect guests again soon. You sip your tea, staring out the window at the still glistening garden maze. The breeze stirs a ribbon. Somewhere, someone's laughing. You close your eyes for a moment. Just a moment. Because next week, they'll want it bigger. You emerge from the quiet aftermath of the previous festivities, still tasting a hint of candied plums on your tongue, and find yourself once again summoned to the realm of impromptu artistry. This time, it's about music and verse, a delicate duet of lute lessons and courtly lyrics that the night's lingering magic demands. Earlier, as you strolled past the musician's alcove, you noticed Sir Alessandro, a nervous, bespectacled knight with a hesitant smile and trembling hands, fidgeting with his sword hilt. He'd been invited to recite a sonnet meant to charm the heart of a fair lady, yet the weight of expectation was leaving him more disoriented than gallant. Meanwhile, a solitary figure loomed in the shadowed doorway of the music chamber. Maestro Rinaldo, a moody musician known to temper his virtuosity with bouts of inexplicable sulking, as if the very strings of his lute were channels for his melancholic wit. Determined to salvage this promising opportunity, you decide to intervene. "Sir Alessandro," you say in your most reassuring tone, "allow me to lend you my pen, and perhaps a bit of my courage. I'll craft a sonnet that even Venus would applaud." His eyes widen with both relief and a touch of disbelief. A nervous knight entrusting his romantic fate to a pleasure planner of all people. You promise him, by the time tonight is over, your verse will be as smooth as a polished shield and as captivating as a moonlit waltz in the palace gardens. Slipping into a quiet study lined with well-worn parchments, you unfurl a fresh sheet and begin to scrawl a seductive, clever sonnet. Your quill dances over the paper as you weave together images of burning passion softened by the glow of twilight. Every line is measured not only to flatter the knight's modest charm, but to echo the court's perpetual quest for idealized love. It's a delicate balance of wit, emotion, and that slight hint of mischief, a nod to the time when even a simple breeze could stir scandalous gossip about secret glances between nobles. As you work, you make mental notes. Mention how the illuminated manuscripts of the past influence your craft. Reference the classical allure of Ovid's tales that many a noble has secretly admired. And of course, ensure that each couplet is laced with a playful edge. You quip to yourself, if only these words could seduce a reluctant cook, they'd put even the tastiest peacock pie to shame. At that moment, you can almost hear the ghost of Petrarch nodding approvingly, or perhaps rolling his eyes at your modern jest. Historians still argue whether Renaissance expressions of love were the result of genuine courtly romance or a mere performance art designed to distract from the harsh realities of political intrigue. You like to think that your sonnet transcends such debates by being an honest, if artful, representation of heartfelt ardor tempered by courtly humor. By the time your sonnet is complete, Sir Alessandro is practically trembling with anticipation as you unveil it. His eyes skim the verses, and his expression shifts from skepticism to wonder, a transformation as delightful as watching a miser finally embrace charity. "It speaks to me," he whispers, almost in disbelief, "as if you've captured the very essence of my beating heart, or at least the awkward fluttering it makes when I see my beloved." "Indeed," you assure him with a wry smile, "it is your heart's blueprint, no less delicate than the silk threads of a Venetian rug, and no more ostentatious than a humble supper." He practices reciting the lines aloud, stumbling over the syllables initially, until your gentle corrections guide him toward a more assured cadence. Between stuttering bursts, he manages a self-deprecating joke about his own clumsiness. "I suppose if my tongue were a jousting lance, I'd never win a tilt." You laugh softly, offering him a nod that says, "There's victory in vulnerability." With Sir Alessandro buoyed by newfound confidence in his verses, your attention shifts to the moody maestro Rinaldo. His lute rests on an elaborately carved stool, the instrument strings humming with discontent as if echoing his own sulky mood. You approach him cautiously. "Maestro, your music is the soul of this night. Will you lend your gracious talent to accompany our night's recitation?" His initial frown deepens as he glances at you, his eyes dark with brooding intensity. "I am in no mood for triviality," he replies, the corners of his mouth twitching, betraying a hint of amusement even as he protests his unyielding seriousness. You counter gently. Trivial it may seem, but it is in the subtleties of a lute's whisper and the soft cadence of a verse that true romance is born. Think of it as painting the sky at dawn, a fleeting masterpiece that only the sincere can truly appreciate. You tap his forearm lightly. Besides, once you strum those strings, I'm betting even you will find yourself smiling at the absurdity of it all. Your art can soften even the hardest of exteriors, like a noble's belly after a feast of peacock pie and candied figs. Reluctantly, Maestro Rinaldo picks up his lute and performs a tentative melody, each note hanging in the air like dew on a summer leaf. Initially, the strains are hesitant and disjointed, as if the instrument were unsure whether to weep or to sing. You hum along softly, guiding him, your voice a quiet counterpoint to his tentative chords. Slowly, His fingers find their rhythm, and the melody shifts to something more fluid, enchanting even. You detect subtle humor in his music, a playful lilt that recalls a time when misbehaving swans and runaway goats were the norm in these very halls. As the rehearsal continues, you watch the two converge, a knight's recitation buoyed by soulful lute strings, both performers easing into a duet that feels as natural as the gentle murmur of a fountain in the palace courtyard. The atmosphere transforms into a bubble of tender connection, one where art becomes the bridge between uncertainty and admiration. Every now and then, a light chuckle escapes your lips when Sir Alessandro mispronounces a word and Maestro Rinaldo adds a flourish that seems to say, even the divine have their off days. You can't help but join in the small comedy of it all. If we ever record this performance, you muse aloud, we might call it the Ballad of the Blundering Knight and the Melancholy Maestro. Your words elicit a soft laugh from the knight, and even Rinaldo's normally somber eyes twinkle, if only briefly. The shared humor becomes another thread woven into the tapestry of tonight's unfolding legend. During a moment of calm between verses, you step back and allow yourself a deep inhale, letting the mingled scent of night-blooming roses and freshly inked parchment fill your senses. The scene before you, of a knight who has found his voice and a musician rediscovering his passion, embodies the peculiar alchemy of Renaissance revelry. It is as if the chaos of the previous night has distilled itself into a singular, harmonious moment where creativity triumphs over convention. Yet, even in the midst of this seemingly perfect union of verse and music, you are reminded that art in these turbulent times is often seen as both a celebration and a rebellion. There are murmurs that some noblemen secretly dismiss such refined expressions as decadent indulgences, while others exalt them as harbingers of a new era of romantic enlightenment. Historians still argue whether the delicate interplay of courtly love and artistic expression was a genuine expression of personal passion, or merely an elaborate performance to outshine rivals. You decide that tonight, under the soft glow of lantern light and the honest smiles of your performers, it is both a transcendent moment that defies easy explanation. As the final strains of the lute fade into a hushed echo, you see Sir Alessandro's eyes glisten with gratitude and perhaps a touch of newfound pride. Maestro Rinaldo offers a slight, almost imperceptible nod of approval, a rare concession from one who usually remains steadfast in his gloom. The synergy between them, born of your impromptu guidance and their own hidden reserves of talent, lingers like the final note of a cherished melody. With the sonnet now memorized and the melody firmly etched into the evening air, you can't help but feel that tonight's trials have birthed something truly memorable. Even if the memory is later overshadowed by another goat debacle or yet another wandering tapestry scandal, this moment, the convergence of a nervous knight and a moody maestro, will be recounted with fond humor in the retellings of court gossip for years to come. You straighten your cloak and smile, content in the knowledge that you have once again orchestrated a moment of unexpected beauty amidst a sea of chaos. After all, in the tumultuous life of a Renaissance pleasure planner, these are the moments that make every frantic hour worthwhile. The next morning begins, naturally, with a disaster. You've just sat down with a cup of weak rose-hip tea, your first real pause in nearly 48 hours, when a servant crashes through your door with the haunted expression of someone who's seen too much velvet. The tapestry's missing, she gasps. The tapestry. You blink. Which tapestry? She swallows hard. The one with the swan and the lady. Ah, the infamous Leda and Zeus in swan-formed tapestry. The one that nearly got you excommunicated by Father Ulrico, then nearly got turned into a table runner when the goat chewed the fringe. You rise slowly. Are we sure it's gone? Not misfiled? Hung upside down in the wine hallway again? We found the frame, she says, and a feather. You sigh. That feather could be from a swan, a goose, or Belladonna's hat. You make a mental note to investigate all three. On your way to the ballroom, you encounter 3 competing rumors about the theft. The bishop ordered it destroyed in a holy purge. The Venetian merchant bought it and shipped it home inside a rug. The poet eloped with it. The last one feels disturbingly plausible. You find the head steward overseeing cleanup and question him. He raises an eyebrow. You're assuming this was theft. I'm assuming nothing, you reply. But I do need to know if I should start composing a diplomatic apology in verse. He points you toward the Duchess's chambers, where a message awaits you, handwritten, looped, and smug. I took it. It spoke to me. Do not worry. I have commissioned a less symbolic replacement. You're welcome. You groan. Of course. Problem technically solved. Emotionally, you may never recover. Still, you shift back into planning mode. The next event is already looming. A quiet supper, honoring a visiting humanist philosopher who insists on dining in silence while a recorder ensemble plays selections tuned to the planets. You write this on your list, right under. Find out if goats can be trained to deliver scrolls. Invent myth about missing tapestry to distract the bishop. Bake apology pairs. Back in your study, you sort through the leftover notes from the maze. Several guests left compliments. Enchanting, clever, emotionally revealing. One simply drew a heart pierced by a swan beak. You pin that one to your wall. Later that afternoon, a courier delivers a scroll tied in waxed string. It's from the Countess of Mantua, a notoriously prickly patroness who once threatened to outlaw laughter at her estate. You brace yourself, open it, and find a request. Could you design a garden game that mirrors the rise and fall of political alliances using edible tokens and metaphorical obstacles? You stare at it, then you smile. Because that's your specialty, isn't it? You invent meaning, thread narrative through snacks and song, and convince powerful people that their chaos is choreography. You build dream worlds with ribbon and timing and candlelight and the occasional stolen peacock. You manage egos by flattery and disasters by metaphor. You are a Renaissance pleasure planner. You do the impossible on a deadline in doublet and hose. And even though your bones ache and your tea is cold and a goat once bit you during a poetry reading, you're ready for the next absurd request. Because the truth is, you secretly love this madness, this dance of diplomacy and drama, this theater of fleeting joys. You pour yourself another cup of tea, fresh this time, and jot down a few preliminary notes for the Countess. Game title: The Feast of Fickle Friends. Obstacles: wine spill, lost heir, misinterpreted letter. Tokens: candied fruits shaped like duchies. Optional rule: if your character falls in love, you lose political leverage, but gain dessert. You sit back and grin. The sun slants through the window, warm on your sleeves. Somewhere, distant lute music begins again, and the next event begins, before the last has even truly ended. By early evening, you've reorganized your thoughts, soothed your overworked feet in a bucket of rosemary water, and begun conceptualizing the Countess of Mantua's political allegory garden game, an assignment so convoluted it makes the flirtation maze look like tic-tac-toe. But before you can get too far into the mechanics of edible duchies and betrayal-based bonus rounds, another knock comes at your door. This time, it's not a servant or a goat, but a messenger from the royal tailor, standing stiff as starch with a note sealed in bright pink wax. You crack it open, expecting a fabric invoice. Instead, the note reads, "We have a crisis. Multiple nobles have submitted identical costume requests for the next banquet. Attached, sketches. Advise immediately before blood is spilled." You look at the sketches. Every single one depicts someone dressed as Apollo, god of sun, poetry, and excessive accessories. Apparently, 3 different nobles believe they originated the idea and have taken exclusive divine rights quite seriously. You murmur, "Not again." You recall the last time this happened. 2 Julias at a masquerade ball. 1 ended up in the fountain. You hustle over to the tailor's workshop, where velvet bolts have become barricades and someone's crying over a broken lyre pin. The tailor, Signore Ricciardo, greets you with dramatic despair. "They demand uniqueness," he wails, holding up 3 identical gold tunics, "and they won't negotiate. One has a personal astrologer, another has a falcon, and the third claims his ancestors are literally descended from Helios." You massage your temples. "All right, listen, we're going to differentiate." You take a quill and paper and sketch 3 variants. Apollo the poet, feather quill tucked into the belt, scroll motif embroidered on sleeves. Apollo the warrior, armored pauldrons over the robe, sun-shaped brooch. Apollo the visionary, silver thread, blindfold tied around the brow. Symbolic, of course. Sell it as a theme, you instruct. 3 aspects of Apollo, the Trinity of Radiance. Ricciardo stares at you. That might actually work. It'll work because I'll write a pre-dinner speech explaining it. You leave him looking 10 years younger and head directly to the aviary, where, because of course, someone has requested live birds as part of the evening's philosophical symbolism. You find the aviary keeper elbow deep in feathers and anxiety. "The guest wants doves," she explains, "for peace." "How many?" 12. "Do we have 12? "We have 4, and 1 pigeon we've painted." You sigh. "Paint another pigeon. If it coos softly, no one will know." You return to your study and draft the introductory speech to the threefold Apollo concept, using just enough Latin to sound intelligent, but not enough to cause the bishop to faint. You also slip in a gentle metaphor about harmony through individuality, because if one more noble challenges another to a duel over a gold hemline, you're going to throw yourself into the nearest ornamental moat. As you scribble, a knock interrupts you again. This time, it's the Duke's librarian, carrying a scroll and wearing an expression that can only be described as delicately panicked. He clears his throat. The Duke requests an interlude of contemplation during the next feast. You pause mid-sentence. "Interlude of what now?" "Contemplation," he repeats. He's recently read a treatise on stillness and wishes guests to reflect quietly after the soup course. You stare. He wants a moment of silence, at a feast, in a hall of 80 people, after soup. The librarian nods solemnly, with ambient harp. Of course, you sketch a placeholder in your evolving schedule. 8:10 p.m., the meditative broth interval, 2 minutes of structured inner turmoil, optional harp. You pray the guests are too full to revolt. Historians still argue whether Renaissance nobles truly craved deep philosophical reflection, or simply liked being seen near it? The answer is probably they liked the sound of it, as long as it didn't interfere with dessert. Still, you write a few sample prompts for the harpist to recite during the pause for wisdom. What is power without beauty? What does the moon reflect that mirrors cannot? If your wine goblet were empty, would you still be full? You consider adding, what is the goat thinking? But scratch that out. Later that night, you stroll through the candlelit garden, mentally walking through every element of the upcoming feast. The maze, now dismantled, has left behind curious footprints and half a ribbon in a tree. The reflecting pool is mercifully free of footwear. Even the swans seem calmer, though tragedy still looks at you with mild contempt. You pause by a marble bench and let yourself sit for a moment. Just one. The stars above you shimmer with quiet satisfaction. You've managed to repurpose rivalries into metaphors, turned a costume crisis into a mythological reinterpretation, and convinced at least 3 nobles to express their feelings through sculpture instead of stabbing. That counts as peacekeeping, doesn't it? You pull out your notebook and write the words you always scribble when things are dangerously close to functioning. This might actually work. Then you cross it out, because you know better. It won't work. Not entirely. Something will catch fire. Someone will quote Plato too loudly. A goat will get into the pastry cart. But like all great Renaissance planners, you don't aim for perfection. You aim for legend. And this one's just getting started. You're halfway through composing a final checklist for the upcoming feast. Dove choreography, harp interlude, Apollo costume variations. When a page bursts into your chamber, holding a plate of burnt quails and a note that simply says, emergency. You don't even ask. You follow him straight to the kitchens, where the staff is flinging open every window and fanning the air with aprons. The smell hits you like a philosophical manifesto, dipped in charcoal and despair. Messer Donato, your long-suffering chef, is pacing like a man on the verge of spiritual collapse. Quails, he howls. All of them. Ruined. Cremated. We fed them the Duke's special herbs, and now they taste like basil-flavored torches. How many are we talking? You ask, already bracing. 36, maybe 35. One escaped. You stare into the pot, where a bird-shaped shadow smolders in a cloud of regret. And the herbs? You ask. New, Donato says. From the philosopher's garden. He said they would improve digestion. Improve. The man has no palate. You scribble a replacement plan in your notebook. Fine. We pivot. Do we have pigeon? Donato's eye twitches. We paint them like we do the doves, you continue. Or we rename the dish. Say it's a monastic delicacy. Add a story about a friar who accidentally invented it during a fast. He pauses. Can we serve it with roasted figs? Only if we say the figs were enlightened. Done. Crisis downgraded from culinary apocalypse to medieval anecdote. You head upstairs to check on the 3 Apollos. The tailor's assistants are adjusting cloaks, fluffing curls, and whispering Latin puns about enlightenment. One noble demands more gold embroidery to match the heat of the sun. You suggest a modest constellation of sequins instead. He agrees. Barely. You remind them all. No fire tricks. No actual horses. And for heaven's sake, no arguing over whose chariot goes fastest. Then you duck out just in time to intercept a brewing disaster near the reflecting pool, where the Count of Forli has declared that he's having a vision and insists that the water is speaking to him. You glance around. The water is not speaking. It is doing what water does, reflecting moonlight and quietly harboring duck feathers. Your Grace, you say. Perhaps the water reflects your own thoughts, which are, I must say, unusually deep tonight. He blinks, nods, and mutters something about founding a philosophical school in Ravenna. Crisis dodged. Historians still argue whether Renaissance feasts were more about diplomacy, indulgence, or competitive daydreaming. You've decided that any event where someone hallucinates in front of a pond is diplomacy, just dressed up in lace. Back inside, guests begin arriving in small waves. The harpist plucks tentative scales. Trays of enlightened pigeons are being arranged beside bowls of jewel-toned fruits. Everything appears serene, but you know better. You know the chaos is just behind the curtains, always waiting for its cue, which is when a servant bursts in, whispering urgently in your ear. The bishop wants to give a sermon. You stare. Now? He says the room feels spiritually porous. You sigh. 5 minutes. Quiet. Pre-dessert, then wine. He nods and vanishes. You pace along the banquet perimeter, checking every element. The trio of Apollos lined up like sun-themed chess pieces. The harpist tuning gently, the philosophical dove wrangler holding a single confused pigeon. And then it begins. First, the lute prelude. Sweet. Drifting. Guests lean in. Clara plays with a confidence that's part skill, part sleep deprivation. The harpist joins, and together they fill the room with soft notes of longing and figs. Then, the Apollos enter, 3 shimmering embodiments of divine ego. The guests murmur appreciatively. They love it. They believe it. You silently thank every Greek deity for theatrical lighting. The bishop delivers his sermonlet, a meandering parable about restraint, moderated by your polite foot tapping once it crosses the 4-minute mark. Applause is hesitant but polite. You cut it short with the sudden arrival of soup. Smart move. As guests begin their meditative broth interval, you watch a stillness settle across the hall. For a moment, there's quiet. True, contemplative silence. You catch your breath. Could this be? And then a loud splat interrupts everything. Matteo the goat has reappeared, having head-butted his way past a side door and leapt triumphantly onto the dessert table. He stands in the middle of a tray of marzipan pears, wearing a crumpled laurel wreath and chewing contemplatively on a ribbon. No one moves. The bishop gasps. The philosopher says, "This is fate." You step forward, place a hand on your chest, and announce, "The goat is an embodiment of chaotic wisdom." He reminds us that no matter how refined our courtly aspirations, nature will always outwit our design. There's a pause, then applause, actual applause. Guests nod. Someone mutters, "Brilliant." A scribe starts taking notes. Matteo sneezes onto a truffle. You guide him off stage with a slice of fig and the dignity of a royal emissary. The applause continues. Later that night, as wine flows and guests sing questionable madrigals under moonlight, someone toasts you. "To the planner," they cry, "who made a goat divine." You smile faintly, swirling your goblet, already half dreaming of sleep. Because tomorrow, there's talk of a water-themed banquet, and you'll have to ask someone if eels can wear crowns. By the time the final candle burns low, and the last embroidered slipper is retrieved from under a table, you are, against all odds, still upright. The feast has ended. The guests have dispersed in waves of perfume and confusion. The goat is asleep in the steward's quarters, wearing a napkin as a cape. Someone has drawn a fresco of him on the wall in wine. You don't stop it. Instead, you drift slowly through the echoing halls, like the ghost of a job well done. clutching your notebook in one hand and a half-eaten candied violet in the other. The harpist plays her final notes, the melody soft as breath. Even the pigeons seem settled, nestled in their temporary aviary with crumbs of philosophical crackers. You pass by Clara, who is folding her lute back into its velvet case. She catches your eye and offers a quiet nod. "That was chaos," she says, smiling. "Yes," you reply. "But it was themed chaos." You glance over the long tables, empty platters, stained linen, the echo of laughter still clinging to the flagstones. There's something sacred in the debris, an aftermath that means something was built, something happened, something real. A moment conjured and dissolved, just like that. You sit down, truly sit, for the first time in what feels like weeks. The bench is too hard, your legs are too tired, and you feel like a tapestry that's been hung, admired, then rolled back up a little too roughly. But you smile. You've survived peacocks, poets, monks, 3 Apollos, swans with trust issues, goat interventions, and a last-minute sermon about restraint that included a parable involving spoons. And still, no one lost a limb. A soul, maybe, but not a limb. Across the hall, a noble is helping another noble tie a sandal. The bishop is asleep in a corner, clutching a scroll titled Contemplative Casseroles. The philosopher is humming. You don't know the tune. It's nice. You know that by sunrise, some version of this night will already be exaggerated. That tales will spread about a goat who gave a prophecy, about the mirror that made someone weep, about the lute song that convinced a lady to forgive her cousin for stealing her betrothed 3 seasons ago. You also know that you'll be blamed for something, probably everything, and still, you'll be asked to do it again, because they always come back, for the illusion, the shimmer, the sense that for one night, art and ambition and overcooked poultry can dance together under candlelight and pretend they belong. So you rise, one last time. You collect your notes, tie them into a bundle, and tuck them under your arm. You pat the fresco of the goat on the head. Then, with the quiet dignity of someone who has managed the unmanageable, you whisper to the empty hall, "Sleep well." The hall is silent now. The laughter has faded. The candles burn down to nubs of quiet gold. The scent of rosewater still lingers faintly in the air, mingling with beeswax and the last flickers of warm pastry. You take a slow breath. The chaos has ebbed, like tidewater retreating from a shore of glittering plates and silk scraps. You walk the length of the room one final time, your steps soft against the stone. The moonlight filters through the high windows in soft ribbons, like silver gauze wrapping the world in peace. Outside, the garden maze stands empty, its paths shadowed and still. No more whispered secrets, no more footsteps, just the rustling of leaves and the sleepy trill of a nightingale. Somewhere, far off, a lute plays one final chord. The guests are gone. The stories they'll tell are just beginning. And you, quiet, unseen, the architect of joy, have done what few ever manage. You created beauty from nothing. Not perfection, not control, but magic. You sit again, for real this time. Let your shoulders fall. Let your eyes drift. The night holds you gently now, soft and vast and kind. You close your notebook. You lean back against the stone. You listen to the quiet, and you rest. Good night, dreamer. May tomorrow find you a little more curious than today.